So good evening, and welcome to the Weiss Center for the Performing Arts at Bucknell University. My name is Ed Robinson. I'm a member of the Bucknell class of 1986, and I'm also the Alumni Fellow at the Open Discourse Coalition. Open Discourse Coalition is an independent, not-for-profit organization that brings a variety of intellectual viewpoints and opportunities for open civil discourse to the Bucknell community. This evening, we are pleased to be joined by our co-sponsor, Bucknell Athletics Department, in bringing you to tonight's program entitled The Changing Face of College Athletics and What It Means for Society. Our distinguished panel brings a wealth of experience and perspectives in addressing this topic and questions in college athletics, such as, where are we now? How did we get here? Where are we going? And will it ever be the same? Thank you again for being here. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to our moderator, Carol Stiff.
Thanks, Ed. Good evening to all. Thanks for spending some time with us tonight here at Bucknell. I want you just to listen to a quote to start tonight. It's from the NCAA. Quote, "The mission of collegiate athletics is to enhance the educational experience and personal growth of the student body while they attend college." Keep that in the back of your mind as we go forward tonight. So what has been changing to that formula, very simple formula? Well, I'll tell you a lot has changed. Tonight, our panelists will review and discuss some of the major concerns out there, including how these concerns affect college athletics as a whole and institutions just like Bucknell. Quickly, let me just set the scene here on some of the questions and topics we'll be talking about. Number one, today a student athlete can make money from their name, their image, and their likeness, or more commonly referred to in the media as NIL. We'll get to that right away. Number two, loyalty. Loyalty from players and coaches. How does one coach a team when players transfer to a different school via the transfer portal? And sometimes they transfer before the season's even completed. Or what happens to the student athlete when that coach leaves for a better opportunity? What was that experience all about? Another topic, coaches' salaries. Coaches' salaries versus university college presidents. Coaches who are responsible for one team are making more money than the university president who is responsible for thousands of students on their campuses. Collectives, we've heard that word. What is a collective? Well, as you heard from the quote, our alumni want to give back. They love their experience while they were on campus, and they want to give back and they want to enhance the school. Therefore, they're formulating what they call collectives. Another topic, the arms race. It's real, it's on, game on. What do I mean by the arms race? Universities are building elaborate facilities and enticing student athletes to come to their college because of the state-of-the-art facilities. Conference realignment, as you might know, in recent months, we've seen the Pac-12 be dismantled. A very high-profile conference in national attention is no longer there, and that's due to the media rights negotiations that came down the pike. So, if you're a UCLA basketball player or a volleyball player or even a soccer player, and you will now need to fly cross-country to play Rutgers during the season, what's that experience like for the student athlete? And then, of course, media rights, where we're going with that. And, just the changing faces of the college athletics. It begs this question, should student athletes be paid employees of the university? Should they receive health benefits? And should they receive pensions? Or can those student athletes be fired for poor performance? So some of the solutions we'll try to get to tonight, one might be Congress. Should Congress intervene and help? Do they have the time to help, given all the other issues on their plate? What does help look like? And then the NCAA. NCAA is a member institution. It's driven by 1,000 organizations, members in the college ranks. Is it going to survive? For instance, will the NCAA go bankrupt with all the antitrust lawsuits? So that is what we're going to talk about tonight, and I hope we can get to it all. So Coach Schiano, you're on the timer here. I want you to answer, and then I'll sit down. You ready? Here we go.
He's been ready for
All right. What is the effect of this new world order on your football program, your student athletes, and your ability to create a positive team environment? Where do the NIL collectives fit into all of that? And lastly, can you briefly explain what a collective is all about?
You have 9 hours.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would probably take all night. You're exactly right. You know, I'm really proud as a graduate of Bucknell that the Open Discourse Coalition and the athletic department come together and do something like this. And Ed, it really is a cool thing. And to see students out here, see faculty, coaches, it's what's still right about athletics. And it's what's right about colleges and universities. And right now we're in a stage, you talked about salaries and arms race. That's kind of been going on for as long as football and basketball have been going on. And transfer portal, now student athletes can transfer basically an unlimited amount of times. I don't totally agree with that, but I understand it. The single biggest game changer, though, is name, image, and likeness. And no matter how people want to slice it, we've taken amateurism and we've moved it over to professionalism. And that wasn't the purpose of NIL, but you don't have to go further than a Southeast Conference head coach on his press conference literally said, and now it's legal. And that's what NIL stands for in many of those schools. Now it's legal. And if you notice, the ones that were the most quick to jump on it and it was systemized were really a lot of the programs that were doing that. They were just doing it under the table, and now they're doing it over the table. You brought up an interesting point, the collectives. In the collective, name, image, and likeness is a great thing. I've supported players should be paid. I stood up in 2003 at a head coaches meeting, and I said, I think we need to pay these players, or we're going to have a big problem on our hands. And I got laughed at. And I was a very young head coach at the time. And no one's laughing now. I can remember around 2008-ish or 9, they came out where you could have bagels, nuts, and berries for the team. That was a big thing, right? And I said, well, let's make sure we have, cream cheese and peanut butter. And they said, no, you can't do that, coach.
That's a meal, man.
That's a meal, that's right. So we'll get to that. But the NIL collectives literally have become a parking spot for boosters' money, and then they legitimatize it by having young people do tweets, meet and greets, lunches, things like that for the alums and their guests. And you're not talking about small amounts of money. Now, we've been very, very fortunate, and I know it's the culture and the staff that we have and the relationships we've built, but we're the anomaly. There's not many schools that haven't lost a lot of the players that they wanted to keep. And I am one day away from that not being the case. Another window opens in April where they can leave in the transfer portal, and there'll be people literally scouting our roster and seeing who is vulnerable to be poached. And that happens here at Bucknell. There's a cottage industry now. In the NFL, you have college personnel and you have pro personnel. Now we have high school personnel and we have college personnel. We have people who are scouting in case these kids go into the portal. And who are the ones that are going to go into the portal? The best players at the FCS level. They're going to go into the portal. The best players in the MAC or Conference USA. Who are they? We need to have them scouted so the minute they go in the portal, we're ready to approach them. All of that has created a professionalism in college athletics. I think they should be paid. I just disagree with the mechanism that it's right now. And I think they should have the ability to transfer from school to school, but not unlimited, right? If you do it, that's fine, you do it a second time, but within one school year, or at least one season. We're the only sport that has free agency during the year. I mean, it's unheard of, but that's where we got to. Now we have to work our way out of it.
So, Donald, NCAA, is it too late to get some guardrails passed? Is it what's going to happen to the NCAA? That provocative open I had, are they going to make it? Is there any chance they can put some rules in to help coach?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me also say thank you to the Open Discourse Coalition, and thank you to Bucknell. And it's terrific to be here having this conversation. I left college sports about 3 years ago, as the introduction indicated, to go into the Biden administration. And so I haven't been engaged in this dialogue over the course of the last 3 years, as you all have, but I've been following it and watching this evolution and the challenges that have been presented in this evolution on all of the issues that you described. And it seems like there's a new court case every single day, or a new ruling
NCAA loses.
every single day. And in those circumstances, what happens, as John just indicated, the NCAA loses, there's a TRO, there's some other type of judgment that stands in the way of what the organization, the members of the organization might be trying to do, but that advocates for the rights that I think we all will agree our students that participate in athletics need to have, that they deserve to have as they come onto our college campuses to play. And so there will always be a need, in direct response to your question, for a national organization. We have national championships. We have to have some type of entity that can help maintain balance across the enterprise so that like teams can play against like teams. And what that's going to look like in the future, I don't think any of us know. What we see is the courts dictating what it should look like, but only giving us partial answers to the questions that you asked, only giving us pieces that we don't even know how to fit them in the puzzle anymore as we move along and try to figure out, does the transfer rule work or not work? What should be the guardrails? Well, the NCAA tried to put guardrails on, a lawsuit's filed, and they're enjoined from applying those guardrails. Should we have unfettered NIL where anybody can get anything at any time? Well, the NCAA said, hey, let's have some guardrails around NIL. Universities file a lawsuit, and it's enjoined. And so it's hard to see how the organization can get to a point where it can create the types of guardrails that are necessary to make these things work, to continue to maintain balance. I think about the Alston case. That's the most recent case that the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 against the NCAA. It wasn't an NIL case. It was about providing educationally related benefits. But if you go to that case, and many of you may have read the opinion, those of you who are legal junkies probably did, and most rest of you didn't. You look at, I think it's like page 24 in the opinion. There's a section in there about how the NCAA can do what it wants to do. And what the Supreme Court says is go to Congress, right? That's what they say. They said you can't come to the courts and get these answers because we're charged with interpreting the laws that Congress has already passed, in this case, the Sherman Act, which applies to antitrust behavior, anti-competitive behavior, to be exact. Go to Congress and get the answers. And so that might be the only solution. But in the meantime, that organization, that group of 1,100 members, needs to figure out how to come together to segment itself, to pass rules, to provide fairness, to enhance the student-athlete experience, and at the same time allow competition to occur so that the consumers, you guys, the fans, have a terrific opportunity to watch great sports, and the students, the athletes who are on our campuses, can compete in an environment that's safe, that's fair, and that's enjoyable.
Okay. John, you wrote a book, The Last Amateur, and it had to do with the Patriot League, which is what Bucknell is in. In your opinion, what do you think the impact of NIL and transfer has to this student body?
Well, hello? Did I do something wrong? Hello? Okay. I figured they were going to keep it off all night. Not a bad idea. Bucknell, Patriot League, Ivy League, FCS, football schools are not as affected by either the transfer portal or NILs as Penn State, where you once worked. As anybody in the Big Ten, anybody in the ACC, even though they play lousy football, or the SEC where they don't play lousy football, because, interestingly to me, those are schools where the primary focus for the athletes, and by the way, I got to say this, the term student athlete was invented by Walter Byers to try to convince people that all college athletes were still true amateurs, even before NILs. And it's also redundant. By rule, you have to be a student to be a college athlete. So it's like calling Greg a man person. It's redundant. I use you as an example because you're on my left and I'm lefty. But it does exist at this level, though. I mean, you do have kids transferring out and kids transferring in. And I did a column a couple weeks ago in the Washington Post on a young man named Joe Bamisil, who plays now at VCU. VCU is his fourth school in 4 years. And the instinct is, oh, that's horrible. He had one coach quit, and the new coach told him he wasn't going to play. He went to a second school, George Washington, where he averaged 17 points per game, and then the coach got fired. And so he ended up at Oklahoma and wasn't playing much, but his father had a heart attack. And he wanted to come home and be with his father and help his mother. So he grew up in Richmond. VCU was a place he could be with his parents and go to college. He's going to graduate in 4 years. And until another recent court ruling that went against the NCAA. The NCAA, no offense, Don, legally is the Washington Generals. Anybody remember the Washington Generals? Yeah, the team that lost to the Globetrotters. They won one game, by the way. But it took a court ruling to get him to be eligible. And he's going to graduate in 4 years, even though he's been at 4 schools. And the NCAA always claims that its first concern is the student athlete. There is no way that's the NCAA's first concern. Their first concern is raking in as many TV dollars as they can so that the members of the basketball committee, the members of the football committee can have really nice vacations in the summer. But what I would finish with, before they turn my mic off, is the fact that the NCAA needs to go away. It cannot survive what's going on now with the NILs, with the transfer portal, with the legal decisions. Greg and his coaching staff should not be governed by the same rules as Quinnipiac field hockey. I'm not picking on Quinnipiac, I just like to say it. But the recruiting for those sports is completely different than recruiting for football. True also for basketball. And yet the rules for basketball are very different than football. So I propose 3 organizations. One that runs college football, one that runs college basketball, and one that runs the non-revenue sports. And get strong people in charge, preferably guys who've been coaches in basketball. I'd go after Jay Wright. Football, I would go after Nick Saban. And in non-revs, I'd go after Charlie Baker because he's going to need a job.
All right, that's good. That's good. I
Okay.
need him.
Turn off my mic.
Congressman, I want to come back to you in a second about comments made here about Congress, but I think you need to defend yourself.
No, I'm not here to defend the NCAA.
Okay.
Let me make that clear. I haven't been at the organization, as I said at the top, for over 3 years. I will say this, though. You understand what the organization is. It's a member organization. You know this, John. And it's made up of very well-intentioned people. Now, I know what they say, the road to somewhere is paved with good intentions, right? But there are many, many people that have as their singular focus, coach here included, the welfare of the student athlete, right? Now, whether you want to use that word or not,
I won't.
The college athlete, those who come onto our campuses to compete, is the primary focus for many people that are part of the ecosystem that manage college athletics. So, I don't want to paint the entire organization, all schools, not Bucknell for sure, but all schools, all campuses, all individuals, or even all people in Indianapolis with a broad brush. That's my only reaction. I'm not defending me
All right.
or the NCAA.
Okay.
I'm just saying there are a lot of folks out there that are.
I agree with you completely. Including people in the Patriot League, the Ivy League,
Yeah.
even
So-
sometimes my alma mater.
We do agree.
Okay. Congressman, there are two comments. One is I wanted you to comment on the fact that the coaches' salaries are sometimes higher in many states than medical, presidents of medical institutions. So I want you to comment about how does that look in your mind and in maybe your state here, Pennsylvania. And then number two, I want you to comment about Congress's responsibility here to help put some guardrails in.
Thanks, Carol, very much. And it's great being here with this panel. And certainly, to Open Discourse Coalition brings in some opposing views. And knowing these two guys and reading some of their background, this might get a little heated up here as we move along. This is it's an interesting issue, right? I mean, football and sports is just so very important and to our society. And the situation with the NIL has really changed the game, right? And big time here in college sports. Someone recently said that they didn't just put a hole in the dike. I mean, they knocked the whole dam down, right? And why did that happen? Perhaps it happened because the NCAA was overly strict. In fact, that is exactly why it happened. It was Manziel, his original lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court, and he was overruled. Remember him, he was the first Heisman Trophy freshman winner, recipient, and he got in trouble for writing some autographs, and maybe he knew he was doing the wrong thing, but he did. Apparently he needed the money. And anyway, it sent him down a very rough path along the way. So we're not sure if that whole situation led to that. So the idea that a college athlete, sometimes I use Tim Tebow as an example here, can't receive, and I don't know about, the collectives and the funding that's there, but can't get a Nike contract or can't get a local car dealership, could be on their commercial when they had a good game, right? I mean, the idea that the NCAA kept that from happening is like keeping somebody from having a part-time job. I mean, using their likeness, their identity, and their label, but their name. So something had to break, and it certainly did. When this whole NIL was passed, Florida and Alabama, for instance, said, "Hey, we don't like this idea. We're going to set up some statewide guardrails against it." Well, they did, but those guardrails didn't last very long because it turned out that Florida and Alabama were nowhere near competitive to all the other states, like Pennsylvania, for instance, Penn State and other states, and Ohio State, you name it, to pay their student athletes. So they needed to change all that and get highly aggressive into the game. So the idea that it's patchwork from one state to the next certainly needs to be addressed. It sounds like that we need a federal solution, and I'm not necessarily a fan of congressional federal solutions unless they're absolutely necessary. And in this case, I think we create some consistency, some reasonable guardrails that are fair, that are in the interests of the players, the college players, in the interests of the schools. Right now you have, no offense to lawyers, but you got lawyers and agents, not the athletic department, running this thing, right? And so what's their goal? Not to deliver necessarily what's best for the school or the sport or the athlete, student athlete, but what's in it for them as well, right? So really pushing the envelopes on the spending. And boy, oh boy, the spending. That's I take issue with that too, right? I mean, look, schools are struggling right now to attract students, certainly our state PASHE system, as well as keep tuition levels at a reasonable amount. And meanwhile, this year there's going to be $1 billion spent in attracting football players and basketball players and to those schools. So you'd think there should be a better way. And I came here as well tonight to learn and listen to this esteemed panel who have more in-depth knowledge, certainly the coach here and all, and all these ladies and gentlemen. But I would think that perhaps salary caps or income tax or funding caps for each league or each division, right? The Pac-10, the SEC would have a certain amount each school could allocate to attract these athletes, and it would be consistent within schools of similar size, right? And similar foundations and similar financial positions. So that could be an answer. But there are a couple of bills right now being worked out in the House. And I'm going to be getting very much involved with both. We'll see where that goes. We want to get it right, so I'll be working with colleges and the folks up here on this panel as I'm getting to know them, so as we can have what is a parity from state to state, and as well as a program and initiatives that work. Carol, to your first question, on the salary levels of football coaches versus presidents of medical schools, look, it's just a competitive marketplace, competitive world that exists. So in order to get the best, coach here was Tampa Bay Buccaneers coach. I mean, you're competing to get great coaches with the private sector, with the NFL, as you are in the medical community too, and business schools and all. But schools really have to take a serious approach at this. They need to have balance. They need to communicate why they're doing what they do, have as much transparency as possible, and be looking at the greater good. And the greater good is educating our young people so as to fulfill the American dream and to make our economy as strong as possible. And that does include football.
I would be remiss not to mention Title IX here. NIL deals are for all student athletes. And so let's keep that in mind. I might get back to that in a minute. I want to pivot here and go into conference realignment. And Coach, you're going to be living this very, very soon. Having to make a trip out to UCLA for a football team is, once a week. How does it look for athletes in other sports at Rutgers, whether it's soccer or volleyball or field hockey? How does that look for them in that experience, going back to the quote I started with? They're now going to, lose. I feel sorry for UCLA and Southern Cal having to come east all the time. Give me your perspective on this college realignment, how it's going to affect Rutgers.
Well, I think it all, again, we follow the trail. The trail is money, right? The TV contracts. It's a great thing for Rutgers football. The Big Ten Conference will be on from noon on Saturday till midnight. You'll be able to watch Big Ten football the entire day. So from a business standpoint, it's outstanding. Even from our football standpoint, it's not that much of a challenge. I mean, we'll fly out once this year. We'll play Southern Cal out there. It'll be a 5.5-hour flight. I mean, I took an 8-hour bus ride. We left out back here, and we drove to Harvard. And we stopped for a box lunch somewhere in Connecticut, right? That was a heck of a lot worse than flying on a chartered plane. So, that for football is not a big issue. The issue is just what you came to.
But the non-revs don't fly charter.
Well, I know that, but I'm talking about my world, right? But what I am about to get to is the non-revs. And I don't believe, you hit on it, I believe in some way we need to have 3 or 4 pots. Major college football is different than literally all the rest. And you could say basketball, but basketball is even a little bit more expanded. Major college football, the people that are playing at this level, you talk about salaries and things like that. When you start at $59 million comes to the university just from TV contracts and bowl revenue. Then you throw on top of it millions of dollars each home game net, that number keeps going up and up and up. That's a big business. That's not what it started as, but that's what it's become. And I think trying to fit it into the old package of the NCAA just doesn't work. It is a member institution, you're right. The members were the universities. College football players had nowhere to go. You can either play at that member institution. There's not semi-pro. You can't be eligible for the National Football League until 3 years after high school. Where do you go? Any other business, no one can put you in clamps for 3 years and say, you got to wait. So there needs to be a situation where major college football is separated. Perhaps it's the same thing with basketball. It probably is, because it's just not going on the same line. And this is a classic example. Cross-country travel for non-revenue sports. And they have all these plans. We're going to meet in Arizona and play like a 6-game series, and we're going to fly with Maryland and go cross-country, and that'll save money. And all that's well and good, but is that really why this all started? No, it's not. It's for people to compete. The business part of it is what allows you to do it. All that TV money, all the bowl money. But as soon as that's gone, it's about competition. It's about teamwork. And if it's not going to be funded, because you hit it on the head, schools can't afford to be funding this stuff. And that's where programs that earn their keep, they should be at a level where it's different. It's not that they do anything better or worse. It's just they fill a stadium and they have a TV contract that pays a lot of money. So the leagues and all that, I think it's great for Big Ten football, but I don't think it's great for other things. But I think decisions are made. You got to make decisions for the good of the whole, because what funds the Rutgers athletic department is the money made through Big Ten football.
So John, should football break away from the Olympic sports and keep it more regional?
It more or less has, in a sense, because the NCAA has no control over the conferences, and that's why realignment has happened so quickly, number one. And number two, now that we have a real playoff where there are going to be at least 12, maybe 14 teams, the NCAA will have even less control. Basketball is different, because basketball, the NCAA has the contract with CBS and TNT that brings in all the money for the basketball tournament. But you know, to go back to your question about presidents versus coaches, no one raises more money for Rutgers than Greg Schiano, especially if they win. He's the #1 fundraiser in the school. And he is looked to not to make decisions about where Rutgers should play, but he's looked to win games for Rutgers. And I think, especially in today's era where most college presidents are basically fundraisers, there are a lot of coaches out there who are making more money than the presidents because they should. And I know that goes against my instinct and your instinct and everybody's instinct, but it's just a fact of life.
So if your daughter was going to UCLA, play softball, anyone can take this one, and you have to fly to Rutgers and all the, Penn State, and back and forth and back and forth, I don't know if I'd want my daughter to go to UCLA. How do you think this conference realignment is affecting those two schools, as an example? Who would like to take that?
Congressman?
You volunteered him, John?
I did.
Is that how this works?
I like it very much. I probably would be
I don't want to
flying
talk too
far
much.
more than I prefer. And you would certainly think it could be more organized in an intelligent regional manner than that.
Well,
Yeah,
and
and
you're
that's what
right.
Coach-
You're right that I'm sorry, Don, but we're way beyond being organized regionally. The Big Ten now stretches from Rutgers
Coast to
in
coast.
Maryland to UCLA and USC. That's ridiculous. The first college football game was played between Princeton and Rutgers. And why was that? Because they were right next to each other practically. And that's the way it was for many, many years. You played teams in your own region regardless of the sport. And now that's totally gone. And in one last point, when I was a senior in high school, I was recruited as a swimmer. And I wanted to go to Arizona because it was beautiful and I loved the coach. And I thought that would be a great thing. And my mother said, you can go anywhere you want east of the Mississippi. We're not traveling out to watch you swim or even to see you that far away. And so I compromised and stayed on the East Coast. And still kind of wish I'd gone to Arizona. But the point is, that's a really important point, is how does that affect parents?
Yeah.
And especially in the non-revenue sports, where, okay, let's say they get together in Arizona. You're still going to have to fly through Chicago, change planes, go through security. I know from personal experience that the difference between flying charter and flying commercial, it's like the difference between me and Tiger Woods on the golf course. A healthy Tiger Woods.
I understand you're a scratch golfer, so that might not be.
I scratch a lot when I'm on the golf course.
I mean, this is the dilemma, right? With conference realignment, with a conference that spans from coast to coast, athletes and parents have to make these decisions about where they want to go and how they're going to compete and whether the travel is worth it, because they still are going to school. They still have to tend to their
Allegedly.
academics. We're talking about the women's swim team, John.
Oh, they go to school. They go to school.
You know,
I was a swimmer. I didn't go to school.
and so so that's a component of the recruiting, and it's a component of the parental decision making.
So let's move on to, should student athletes be employees of the university? I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to go out to the Congressman in a second here. Could you explain to the audience what's going on with Dartmouth and that lawsuit, and not a lawsuit, but
Sure.
labor dispute?
They want to unionize.
Yeah, it's almost that simple, but not quite. You know, the student athletes there have said, and I'm using that word, John, on purpose.
I know.
I do this just to edge him, that they want to unionize. And the ruling has been that they have now the opportunity to vote on whether or not they can join the union. I forget what union it is, SAIC maybe. And this follows on a union effort at Northwestern that occurred a couple of years ago, wherein the football players there said that they wanted to unionize, brought it before the regional director. The regional director said, sure, I think these athletes are in fact employees of the university. It went to the NLRB, and the NLRB said, we're not going to address the issue of whether or not they're employees of the university. We just don't believe that creating a union would be consistent with their role on campus, and it would be too difficult, candidly, it would be too difficult for us to manage one school in one sport where you had unionization. And so the NLRB then, they dismissed it. So here you have Dartmouth, where at least in Northwestern you had scholarship football players. Here you don't have scholarship athletes on campus who are asking to unionize, and the regional director here has said, well, you know, there are other benefits that these individuals receive that makes this feel a lot like employment. You know, they get benefits for the school while they don't get scholarships. They get uniforms. They receive other things. And oh, by the way, the coaches still do control their lives, just as they argued was the case in Northwestern. And so the regional director said, yeah, I believe they should be characterized as employees. They should be allowed to unionize. They should be allowed to collectively bargain with the university for their compensation and their benefits. Dartmouth has received permission to, I guess, extend the period in time in which they can appeal. They will appeal. That goes to March 5th, which happens to be the same day that the athletes will get to vote on whether or not they unionize. But when there's an appeal, what you must understand is that the vote is sealed, and it will never be disclosed if the appeal is successful. So should Dartmouth win the appeal, nobody will ever know what the students voted, although they voted unanimously. It's a basketball team. It's only 15 of them to actually move forward. They all joined this effort to try to unionize. If the NLRB rules in favor of the athletes, then they'll have the opportunity to, assuming that the vote goes positively, to join the union, to demand compensation, to engage in collective bargaining for their comp and benefits. The interesting thing here, and why I spent so much time on Northwestern, is that the regional director in the Northwestern case that ruled that the Northwestern football athletes were employees is now the deputy general counsel of the NLRB, and was previously the acting general counsel when the administration started. So we know his position. You just go read the views that he espoused in the Northwestern case. And so that's the challenge that Dartmouth has. They're going into an LRB that is probably the strongest union-friendly NLRB that we've seen in a long time, with an individual that has some influence in this space, who's already articulated a view that athletes on campuses should be employees.
Congressman, do you agree with that they should be paid employees, student athletes? I'm going to ask all of you this question.
And I'll be brief. I don't see what the value is to the student athlete to work for the university. If you're an employee, you have a boss, and the boss is the university. I don't see unionizing is, I think, something completely different. I mean, they do have the National College Players Association, and if they want to unionize and have a unity in that manner, I don't necessarily see a problem with that. It probably will occur. But the idea of being employees, you certainly lose control. And who gains control? Very often the state-run university, or in many cases private schools. But so therefore, then you're a state employee. I mean, this is done, as they say, so they get health care, pensions, and all. And you brought up before high salary levels, so you can have all these players get at hundreds of thousands of dollars a year added on to the employee payrolls. And then what? As you mentioned before, could they be fired? They can be terminated along the way. You know what? Come the end of the day, I just don't see the value of that to the players. I see value to others who maybe don't have all the players and the school's interests at heart, but I don't see why that would be something that should be part of this moving forward. And it's a big debate in the House right now on, some think they need to move forward as employees of the colleges, and many do not. I'm on the side of do not at this point in time.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it will be the last step, but I do think we're going to get there. And to John's point, the separation to different levels. And when that occurs, if they can manage it themselves, whatever that governing body is, if it's the CFP, the College Football Playoff, who handles all the money from that, if that's the governing body, we need someone, as you said, someone that's strong, that's knowledgeable, but the rules have to be ironclad. Because don't think for a minute, revenue sharing to me is the way it has to go, to get it back under the university's control. Right now, we have these third-party collectives that are out of control. We have agents that are taking advantage of student athletes. There's horror stories of kids who are signing contracts. Forget the 20% of their current money, but they're signing 20% for the rest of their career. And they don't know they're signing it. And it's too late. Well, yeah, can we show it to you? Yeah, let me look at it. What are you gonna do? It's signed. It's awful. So what you gain eventually, I think it will get to that. I think there will be unionization. And what they gain then is a true seat at the table, because what people don't, the train left the station. They're getting paid. You can say it's for their name, image, and likeness, but if you're not a good player, your name, image, and likeness isn't going to be very expensive. So it actually does tie to how you play. And any professional sports league, it's been proven out, there needs to be a collective bargaining agreement and there needs to be a salary cap. That's the only way it's worked. Now, some of the caps are hard, some of the caps are soft. They're not all identical, but there needs to be that kind of structure when you're talking about the dollars that are involved. But again, it starts by first separating, because you can't, I forget who said it, but you can't, you said it, John, you can't have one governing body govern this group and govern this group. It just doesn't work. It's too broad. And that's why we find ourselves, in my opinion, we find ourselves where we are. You're trying to make rules fit. You know, when it started, there wasn't $60 million TV contracts to deal with. There wasn't this kind of money that needs to be shared with the players that are creating it. They're not coming to see me, they're coming to see those players. They're not coming to see Rutgers, they're coming to see those players. And it has to be shared with them. And I don't know if it could get done without a union, I would love that. But I think it's going to end up going there. But they need to have their fair share. And the way it's happening now, it's not only not sustainable, it's dangerous.
Well, and one thing to note is that if you made players employees, their scholarships would be taxed because they're employees. And everything would become more complicated. Of course, sometimes more complicated is what you need. But I would love to, you know, you talk about giving the players a voice, which of course they should have. And what the NCAA has done, and you were there for part of the time, is they put one student on a committee. And they say, oh, we have a student athlete on the committee. Isn't that great? What power does that one student have? None. You know, maybe it's good on his resume or her resume when they graduate. But you do need to include the athletes. Most of the athletes are smarter than the rest of us. And you pick the right people to be on the right committees, although I'm against committees. Some people are against unions. I'm against committees. But it definitely has to change. And I would ask you this, Congressman. I think it would be great if Congress could put guardrails on, or whatever you want to call them, on the NILs. But how do you get around the Supreme Court having voted 9-0 to allow unfettered NILs? There was nothing, Don, you're probably more familiar with the opinion than I am, but there was nothing that said you can put a salary cap on, or you can put limits on it. There probably should be, but how do you pass legislation when 5 minutes later some athlete or agent or someone is going to take you back to court?
Well, obviously, any law would have to be past constitutional muster. And I hear what you're saying. That piece of it will be a challenge. But when you put moderation to any, when you bring policy and legislative language to antitrust, for instance, right? I mean, that really falls within that same realm. There's a fairness within the free market case rendering that the Supreme Court had delivered. So we think it's doable.
But I'm glad you're an optimist, especially since you'll be involved, and I won't. But speaking of antitrust, just one thing. The only major sport that has had antitrust is baseball. And baseball has flaunted it since 1922. I was going to say 28, but you're right. I'm sure you're right. And I don't think there's any chance that the NCAA is going to get an antitrust ruling in its favor.
Well, certainly not from the Supreme Court. It's made that clear in the Alston case. It made it clear when it declined to take the O'Bannon case and left the Ninth Circuit's decision in O'Bannon intact. You asked me the question about setting the stage for Dartmouth. The question that I didn't answer is the one that they all answered about where are we going with employment and where might we be going with unions. And I think I agree, I know I agree with the two of you in terms of what's inevitable, right? At some point in time, you have to be for what's going to happen. And we all see the evolution of what's happening in college sports now, and we know that there has to be a system and a structure where the athletes that are competing on our campuses have that real voice. John, you're right. A committee voice is one thing, and I'll tell you, there's some pretty powerful spokespeople for the students that have participated in the NCAA governance structure, but that's nothing like the ability to collectively bargain for just compensation or for your rights. And so I do think that the path that we're on is a path that leads us to a structure, whether you're not going to have unions without employment, a structure where you have this relationship. But the point that I wanted to make was when that happens, you've got to understand it changes the dynamic more than anything else we've been talking about here today. the tax dynamic, the relationship between the coach and the athlete, the coach and the player, that employment relationship, whether or not you can be fired for or fined for missing practice, what happens with scholarships and how that's treated as compensation for those individuals that might be on scholarship, or are there scholarships at all anymore? What is the impact of that? You brought up Title IX earlier with all of our sports, our women's sports, our non-rev sports, or should you just be talking about doing this with the major football programs? John, you mentioned creating different organizations. When I said there needs to be something like the NCAA, it's for the vast majority of the sports that exist in 3 divisions, 1,100 schools, 19,000 teams, 500,000 athletes. We're only really focused on that.
Most of those kids
5%.
you're talking about
Yeah.
will never get an NIL.
Right. Many of them would, but we got a
Most
gymnast.
won't.
We have a female
Yeah, but wait.
gymnast at LSU who's probably one of the highest, but not probably, who is one of the highest paid NIL personalities in college athletics right now.
And how many of her teammates are getting NILs?
0, probably.
Probably.
So I want to hit that before we open up here. So Title IX, you just mentioned it. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the collectives that are doing all these fundraising and booster clubs and all that, the school itself can't get involved. Like if the collective wants to give $1 million to the swim team, then they all get it. So I have to clarify my question here, but for Title IX, if the school steps in and deals with the collectives, they have to give that to all the student athletes, right? They have to not just give it to the football team or the men's basketball team. It has to go across the board, correct?
There has to be gender equity in the structure, but right now you don't have that, and that's one of the things that the Tennessee case has laid out. When the NCAA tried to create, the Tennessee case is a recent case where Tennessee and Virginia, I think, sued the NCAA, and they recently got an injunction around NIL rules where the NCAA tried to create guardrails similar to what you're talking about. And so if you can't do that, then you have this wild, wild west, right? And if you do that, then you have to do it in a manner that's equitable.
And most
for gender.
coaches, Greg, tell me if I'm wrong, will recruit people to give money through collectives, but they will not be involved at all. Greg has friends who have a lot of money. Most coaches have friends who have a lot of money. And they just say, listen, if you want us to get better, we need to be able to compete against other schools. I mean, in the Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan State, you don't think they're raising millions of dollars for their collectives? You got to compete with those guys.
And that's part of the problem. What I said, it's dirty.
Yeah.
Because certain coaches are saying, you get this, you get that, you get this. It's blatantly illegal. But what happened? They flew a guy on a jet to visit Tennessee, private jet. And the state of Tennessee and the state of Virginia went to court and won. So now that wasn't a problem. It's okay.
The other thing that I've said is a lot of people have asked me, how will Rick Pitino do at St. John's? And putting aside his tirade last weekend, I said he'll do great because all the rules he used to break don't exist anymore.
Okay, drop your mic there. Ed, I think it's 8 o'clock. Last round. I guess last comments. I'm going to go to Coach first, and then who else wants to pop in? How do you just keep your team level-headed? And you know, I remember big-time football program brought in a freshman. The guy didn't even make one pass, one handoff, nothing, and he was a millionaire. How does the defensive, offensive line, or whatever, offensive line that has to hike the ball to that guy feel when he doesn't get an NIL deal? I think if I was that hiker, I would just kind of move to the side and let him get a lick at him. But,
have a
I mean,
story.
how do you keep the peace on your team?
I think it's never more important to recruit to your culture. And our culture is one that supports it, but we have millions of dollars that are being spent on the players. And we're low. We are the money ball of the Big Ten. So I can tell you that, as John said, there's teams that are spending much more. But the culture of our program is one of sacrifice and one of truth and honesty. So that's what we've done. And that's been able to withstand it so far. But I say so far because human nature is human nature. We had a young man on our team pass up $1 million to stay at our place for much, much less. How many times is that going to happen? As you recruit young men and it's more established, the relationships that you've built over time, they're not going to be there anymore. So it is a scary thought, and that's why when you talk about Division III, Division II, FCS, there's thousands and thousands of kids. I played here. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but we didn't make any. We cost a lot of money. So when you talk about you have to have separation, because not many businesses stay in business when they keep losing money. Well, that's what every level of football does except a few. And the ones that do, they're different, and they have to be treated different. Yet the experience you have at Bucknell, the teamwork, the camaraderie, the hard work, the sacrifice, all those things that make you such a hireable person when you go into the job market, that's never going to change. We play a sport with a hard shell helmet and hard shoulder pads. You don't put those on at the family picnic and go smash each other. It just doesn't happen. It creates a certain kind of mental and physical toughness that is valued in the real world. When you look at CEOs, you look at people that lead organizations, there's a huge percentage of at least high school level or higher football players that populate those situations. So I think it's worth the fight. I just think there's a small cutout that has to be separated. And I think the rest of sports can go on the way they were because they're not going against what they were set up to do. Big time college football, unfortunately, is. It's big business. That's not what it was set up to do.
Congressman, what worries you about this conversation? Are you worried that universities are going to have to close, or, I mean, what's your takeaway tonight?
Well, I really appreciated what the coach said because I thought he was going to say that and he didn't say great leadership, but great leadership, building that culture, bringing, whether somebody's getting paid $1 million or somebody's not getting paid anything. You know what? Everybody has a job on that team. And fortunately, I played high school football in 2 years, and those experiences and, my business life and even now, I mean, football analogies are just part of the vernacular, teamwork and so forth. We just don't want it getting out of hand and being detrimental in the end, as opposed to being a very positive thing for the players, for the league, and hopefully for the schools, right? I mean, it's got to stay positive. If it starts becoming a negative to the student athletes, to the schools, to a money drain, that is what needs to be of concern. And so we're going to have to put some smart limits on it, get some real good input on what is fair, and be willing to adjust as we go.
One other thing. The thing that hasn't been spoken about is the academic component, right? Even at that level where there's big money, you're still part of a university. You're a smaller part of a bigger entity. So the rules for the academic progress, the rules for graduation, all those things need to stay consistent and actually enforced much, much more strictly. Because when the money's there, there's all these opportunities. Think about when you're 18, 19 years old to have that kind of money in your pocket. If those limits aren't set right out of the gate, that you have to be eligible, you have to be towards degree requirement, all those things, we'll have big problems because until you take it and make it semi-pro, it's still affiliated with the university. So that academic portion has to be really stringent.
John.
Oh, my turn. Well, I don't disagree with anything that either Greg or the congressman have said in terms of trying to do things in the future. But when I'm asked, which I am often, what do you think is going to happen? What's going to be the outcome with NILs or transfer portal? My answer is I haven't got it. I haven't got a clue. I wish I did, because we don't know what will happen in Congress. We don't know what will happen with the next court rulings. Coaches, for the most part, hate the transfer portal because Tom Izzo, who's a Hall of Fame coach, said to me recently, if I yell at a kid in practice, I'm worried he's going to transfer tomorrow. And of course, that's not the way you want it to be either. And the other thing that gets missed a lot is when players do transfer or go in the portal, a lot of times they're the ones that get hurt. Tom Izzo's going to win a lot of games, whether kids coming in and out of the transfer portal or not. But frequently when a kid transfers because he's not playing enough, he breaks up with his girlfriend, whatever it might be, the next place they go is they don't like as much. Or, and you know this, Greg, kids go in the transfer portal and nobody wants them. And they're sitting there going, well, what do I do now? So I got plenty of questions. I'm not great on the answers at this moment.
Closing comments? What worries you?
Olympic sports.
Yep.
You know, the American system of college athletics is unique across the globe. And it is, in fact, where most of America's Olympic athletes are trained, on our campuses. And the resources to provide that training for those athletes are generated through your football programs, your basketball programs, some places baseball and a couple other programs. And I worry that as we go down this pathway that might result in separation or at least some distinction, we not lose sight of the fact that our Olympians are trained on our campuses. And we need to preserve that system and that structure, lest we go to some NGB model and we become less effective. You know, none of us would like a circumstance where we showed up at the Olympics and America wasn't dominant. And I believe that part of that dominance is the product of the training that's provided to these individuals on our campuses. And so as we continue this dialogue, this debate, this discussion, none of us have all the answers or even any of the answers. The one thing that I worry about is losing sight of the Olympians that are on this campus and other campuses and making sure that we're protecting them.
Paralympians too.
And Paralympians.
Yeah,
too.
I agree. Amen to that.
Mm-hmm.
What bothers me, what worries me are media rights from my background and everything being put behind a paywall to get your favorite Bucknell soccer championship game or whatever it may be, because that's considered niche. And
You can run into a paywall for the NFL playoffs now.
That's
the
right.
direction we're going in.
Yeah. Congressman, you got your work cut out for you.
Forward to working with you on it.
Okay, all right. Ed? Thank you.
Let's first give a round of applause for Ken.
Hello, thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Max Bean, I'm an ODC intern. I just thought I'd start with some of our Zoom questions. So, will institutions like Bucknell, without graduate programs, be at a disadvantage in competing within the transfer portal?
Anybody?
Take it
Well,
down.
sure. I'll start, and anyone else can jump in. You know, the implicit in the question is a recognition that transfers come not just from undergraduate programs, but graduate programs, and people leave their schools after they have graduated in order to continue their educational pursuit and compete at another university. So if you don't have a graduate program, then you don't have that programming, that scholastic programming, that somebody might be looking for to continue their education on this campus.
And just to add to what you said, Don, the transfer portal often contains seniors who are graduating, who want to play another year or 2 years with the COVID year factored in with some, of football, basketball, whatever their sport might be. But if there's no grad program, then you can't go to that school.
And I'll just quickly add, my son goes here, and I think Bucknell's a great place, really just a place that Pennsylvania is very proud of. And he's having a great time here, getting a great education. But I think the answer is yes, right? to that question.
Thank you.
Other questions from the audience? Students, non-students?
There was a lot of talk tonight about the future of college athletics and the focus of NIL, but there's been another element as far as the focus of money that's been changing a lot for college athletes, and that being the increase of sports betting. In the past year, there have been a lot of investigations and even penalizations for a lot of NCAA athletes, and there's a strong policy in the NCAA of don't bet on it, but that isn't necessarily followed by all the athletes. Is this the best way to manage sports betting for college students, or is there going to be a different future for that?
Well, I can start. For years, we tried to avoid a circumstance where you had widespread betting on college sports, yet our Supreme Court, in their infinite wisdom, opened up betting on college sports.
Betting on everything.
Well, yeah, betting on all sports, and all of the professional leagues were part of that litigation. You know, the Don't Bet on It campaign preceded that Supreme Court case. It was tied up in other legislation that prohibited betting on collegiate athletics in the college sports space. I think the resources need to be applied at the national, the conference, the campus level to educate our students, not just our athletes, but students across the board, about the impacts of sports wagering and how that might affect them financially, not just while they're in school, but in a lifetime. And the Don't Bet on It campaign is part of that. You see the same thing that occurs in terms of discouraging wagering at all the professional leagues and all the sports leagues. And I think it has to continue.
I would say this: if you want to talk about sports betting and how it affects colleges and our society, we need to all get together here in another couple of weeks, because it's a wholly different topic and it's out of control in many ways. And I love the fact that the NFL tries to legislate, you know, where their players can bet. Like none of the players in the Super Bowl could bet in Vegas. And then during the telecast, you see 406 ads for betting sites. And there's a lot bit of hypocrisy involved there. But it is a very difficult issue, difficult to police, difficult to decide what's okay and what's not okay.
Thank you,
You
sir.
can bet on it.
Oh, I'm sorry, Congressman Meuser, go ahead. Congressman?
He said bet on it.
Oh, bet on it. Oh, I see. Sir?
Yes. Okay. Now, I chose broadcasting as a career about 50 years ago, and of course, like, okay, you know, all this is considering the student athlete is still a student. What about like internships for those who want a career in sports? Whether it's announcing, whether it's the technical end of it. I mean, you know, there's more to this than meets the eye when it comes to the practical application from a student standpoint.
Sure, I'll take that. While I was at ESPN, we had an internship program. Actually, we married it to our SEC contract, that we would provide opportunities for student athletes competing at the SEC, both all sports, to be given an opportunity to do exactly what you just asked. Good idea.
Thank you guys for your time. So in terms of conference realignment, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the structure of Notre Dame, where their football is unaffiliated and independent, and the rest of their programs are in the ACC. And so Chip Kelly, who's in a unique position as the head coach of UCLA, suggested that all the FBS teams should just follow this model, where you've got a Power 5 conference with 64 teams, a Rest of 5 conference with 64 teams, and you'd be able to keep regional rivalries while allowing cross-country play. I guess like the NCAA would be in charge of the TV contract, similar to college basketball. Do you guys think this is a good idea, and is it even plausible given the current TV contracts?
I'll start in 1984, the United States Supreme Court. I keep coming back.
I was
to
covering
the Supreme
that
Court.
story, yeah.
In a
gone
case called
downhill.
Board of Regents versus the NCAA, brought by Oklahoma and Georgia, when the NCAA did, before that, control the media rights for college football and control the number of games that could be televised. And the school said, no, we don't think that's fair. They brought it to the Supreme Court, one of the first antitrust cases against the NCAA, and the Supreme Court said, no, you should not control that on a national level. And that really, in my opinion, led to the evolution of the power of the conferences and the media rights centralization in the conferences rather than at a national level for football.
And let me add, because I covered the convention where that came up as a subject, even though Oklahoma and Georgia were the ones on the court, on the case, Notre Dame was right there. Father Joyce was as outspoken as anybody at that convention, and that's what I love about Notre Dame. You know, they keep trying to claim they're the Harvard of the Midwest, but they will fall on any dollar they can find. And by the way, we discussed this earlier, the last time they won a national championship was 1988, which my math isn't very good, 35 years ago. So I think the idea is a great one, but it'll never happen. It'll never happen. The schools will never go for it.
Did you want to add something?
No, I think what Chip did is he took the NFL and he multiplied it by 2, and that's what he's suggesting.
And I think on the contract side, you'll have to unravel many, many contracts which are way out in time. So it's a long putt.
And by the way, then he fled to the NFL again.
So I had a question about the idea of contracts with student athletes being able to unionize and become employees of the universities. Does that open up a contract for universities to stay? In order to get this NIL deal, in order to get the scholarship, we're going to lock you into 4 years at our university to participate in our sports here and not allow you to transfer.
That's a great question. I mean, it could. You know, it depends on how the collective bargaining plays out. Coach?
Yeah, I think if we get to that where there's revenue sharing, then it is a whole different model.
It is.
And there is no NIL, so to speak. I mean, if a guy's a great player and somebody wants to hire him to do a commercial, that's his business. But there won't be any more collectives. And one of the things that has to happen is if this new format is created and there is this group, there needs to be enforcement. And that's one of the biggest problems that's occurred with the NCAA and, enforcement. The enforcement staff has been cut so deep. The head of enforcement is a friend, and he's come to my office a couple times, and I've said to him, this can't happen, and he just put his hands out like this.
Plus, they have no subpoena power, which
too,
makes
but
it that much more difficult.
At least they were fighting the fight. Now, if we do this new group, in the NFL, a certain coach had bounties on his team.
We know who it was.
And they suspended the coach for a year without pay, no contact with his team. Now, so everybody knows, every team in the league had bounties. He wasn't the only one.
He just got
But
caught
you know
on
what?
tape.
There's no more bounties in the NFL. When you take a coach and you say you are not going to be around your team, most of them, the money isn't the issue even. Yes, you're not getting paid, but you're not allowed to be around your team, you're not allowed to have any contact. There are no bounties now in the NFL. So that's the kind of enforcement that has to be put in place. If we go to this new era, there can't be any funny business outside the lines. This is the cap, right? And the NFL is a good example of it's very serious business when you cheat the cap.
Thanks for coming out. I work here as a sports information director for Bucknell softball, and I was fortunate enough last year to go down with us to Florida. And John, you mentioned how you're thinking about a three-pronged structure: football, men's basketball, and the Olympic sports. But at Florida, they told us the guy with the $100,000 truck was the head coach, and he's making about a couple $1 million. So softball, for example, has grown exponentially in revenue. They're on national TV, ABC. How would your structure handle that if softball would become a revenue sport? Because at several institutions, it has become that.
Well, and you should say the same about women's basketball, where I don't know how many, but half a dozen schools are making money on women's basketball.
And volleyball.
And volleyball. And some in softball, I think.
Very, very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is, if someone becomes a revenue sport in a sport where the majority are not, you don't have to change anything. You just say, good for you, and maybe you can be an example for other programs in terms of making money. And I want to, as my last statement of the night, I have the answer for court stormings. I'm the only one. You storm the court, your next home game is forfeited. Guarantee you there'll never be another court storming. It's very simple. Thank you. 8 people agree with me. That's good for me.
Dr. Soika.
I would like to essentially tell the people that are in, or not tell, I'd like to acknowledge the people who are involved in managing and coaching and reporting on intercollegiate athletics for what the athletics actually do educationally for the student. Somehow I think that got lost in the discussion tonight. There was talk about academic performance, and then we immediately got into money and people changing around and everything. Maybe I'm naive, but I feel I was the beneficiary of the concept of character development, the concept of finding who you are, manning up, becoming a true team player, willing to sacrifice not just in words but in deeds, to accept pain for others. There are great things to learn on the field, but much of that comes from coaches and coaching staffs that are committed to player development. They can take a mama's boy out of high school or a mama's girl, and they can turn them into a self-assured adult, which probably explains why so many collegiate athletes find themselves leading businesses and so on. What worries me more than anything else about what we're talking about tonight with the combination of the NIL and the transfer portal is that it seems to me it disincents coaches from spending time, money, and effort on player development when you can simply trade them around, move them around, and if that happens, I think it's a tragedy.
President Soika, that is dead on. So my job, I accepted the Rutgers job for the second time in December of 2019, and this stuff didn't exist. My job now has changed. I spend about 60% of my time fundraising for NIL. So it definitely, you can say whatever you want, but if you're out doing this, you're not doing this. And, you know, I'm blessed to have a tremendous staff, and I lean into them a great deal. And then I know that when I am back at the office and in the facility, that I can't be involved in the X's and O's anymore. I have to be involved in their lives because there just isn't time to do it all. But you hit it on the head. It's a tough, tough decision how you're going to spend your day in this day and age as a coach.
I think what Carol read in her opening about what you want NCAA or college athletics to be is exactly what you're talking about. That's what college athletics should be. I think at Bucknell, other Patriot League schools, Ivy League schools, others, you come as close to that as you possibly can. And the higher up you go in terms of money and championships and things like that, the harder it becomes for coaches like Greg, because they do have to concern themselves with the NIL. Because if you don't have NIL money, you can't recruit at that level. At this level, you can. I just finished researching a book on Ivy League football, and NILs are basically a non-factor. And there's a few players, a handful, but they're basically a non-factor. The players who I've met in this league and in the Ivy League fit your description of what you want an athlete to be. They're bright. They know there's more to life than their sport. They know they have to prepare to do something after they're done playing, whether they play in the NFL, the NBA, or done at the end of college. And that's the utopia we should strive for, with the understanding that there's really no such thing as utopia.
If I could, I just want to end with a quote. Ernst & Young did a study many years ago now, maybe 5 years, and 94% of women, female CEOs, competed in sports. So it does pay off.
For Mr. Feinstein?
Uh-oh.
No, it's okay. I didn't appreciate how depressing this whole conversation was going to be when I came here today. And I'm going to go back to the last amateurs. okay? And you started it with an anecdote, and I forget, it was about being in the losing locker room during a basketball game, and remember, this was 2000, and you were talking about what they were talking about in the locker room. They were talking about the fact that McCain had killed Bush.
It was Bucknell.
It was McCain had killed Bush in a debate the night before, and this was in the losing locker room. And I just to end on a positive note, what was your favorite memory from that season?
Well, that was one of them. It was a reference to the New Hampshire primary. And the point I was making was I had done a book on the ACC a few years earlier, and there wasn't a whole lot of talk about politics in those locker rooms. But I think my favorite moment was watching the Lafayette players, particularly a player named Stefan Čosić from the old Yugoslavia, who had torn up his knee and been told he'd never play again. And he came back to play and was the MVP of the Patriot League tournament. And I walked over to congratulate him, and the guy's 6'11", and he just started crying on my shoulder because he was so happy about being able to come back and do what he did in helping his team win that tournament. I love moments like that, especially for a kid who's been to hell and back to try to play again. So there were a lot of moments I enjoyed in that book, a lot of them, but that was one of them.
Okay, thank you. First, I'd like to thank again our co-sponsors, the Bucknell Athletics Department and the Bucknell Program for American Leadership, and of course, all of our donors and supporters at the Open Discourse Coalition, for whom, without these events, would not be possible. And I'd like to thank our panel as well and all of you for coming. Thank you. Have a good night.